So last time, let us do a quick review of what we did last time. The time before last time when we started on syntax, remember? We talked about the structure of phrases, right? And we came up with 5 phrase structure rules, right? NP consists of what, VP consists of what, PP consists of what, and so on, remember? And when you combine an NP and a VP, you get an S. Remember, a sentence consists of an NP and a VP. So that's what we did when we first started on syntax. And last time, some of you were absent. So last time we talked about complex sentence structures. Rather than one single sentence, right? Rather than things like, I love you, rather than things as simple as that, we talked about complex sentence structures, right? And when you make a sentence complex, you can do it in 2 ways. You can conjoin the clauses, right? Conjoin meaning you can attach them together using a conjunction. So your structure will look like this. If you join 2 NPs, you use a conjunction. So you have 2 branches, 2 NPs, right? NP1, NP2, conjoined using conjunction like that. And you make the same category. Remember, when you conjoin things, you make a bigger thing of the same category. Meaning if you conjoin 2 NPs, the result will be an NP. The result cannot be a VP, right? When you conjoin 2 S's, when you conjoin 2 sentences, the result is a longer sentence, right? So S is a result of S1 and S2, like that, right? And each S will have its own structure, NP and VP, like that. Okay, so that's the first case where you conjoin clauses or where you conjoin phrases using conjunctions. When you do it that way, before we leave that topic, when you do it that way, you always have maybe a 3-branch structure like this or 4-branch structure, depending on how many things you conjoin. Right? And the second way you make a sentence complex is when you embed a clause within another clause. When you embed it, rather than having 2 sentences that are equal in terms of the syntactic weight, you have one inside another. Embed is one inside. To embed something inside another thing is when you have a sentence within another one. So, for example, he said that he loved you. You see that there are 2 sentences because there are 2 verbs. Whenever you have 2 main verbs, you have 2 sentences, right? Said is one, and love is another one, which means that you must have 2 S's. But the problem here is that the second S, the second sentence, is within the bigger one. So he said that he loved you could be drawn like this. S consists of NP and VP. That's the main sentence. So we have he here, right? And he. And then the VP goes to V, which is said. Now, the other S is inside here, okay? It's embedded, remember? Said what? Like he said hello, like that. But here it has to be an S. But when you have an S embedded within another one, you need what we call a CP, right? Complementizer phrase. A complementizer phrase, or CP, C is complementizer. The CP signals that what follows is a small clause, right? A smaller clause. Let me get rid of this. A smaller clause consisting of C, which is a complementizer, words like that, words that you use to join 2 clauses together, right? That or whether or something like that, okay? And other words. And then to the other side you have S, right? And then that S consists of NP and VP. So this is he, and then V, loved, and then NP, and you, like that. So that's what we studied last time. Right? So this is what we study. Okay? Embedded. The meaning of embedded is the fact that there's an S within another S, which is under, right? Which is different from the other side here. This is conjoined. This is embedded. Okay? But both are two different ways that we can make a simple sentence, a compound sentence, or a complex sentence. Okay? That's what we looked at last time. And we also look at a particular case, right? A particular case of what we call ambiguity. Ambiguity is when a sentence can mean two or more things, right? For example, I saw a man with a telescope. I saw a man with a telescope. There are two interpretations. First, I saw a man who had a telescope, right? It's the man who had the telescope. In this case, the with a telescope is an adnominal. Remember that term, adnominal prepositional phrase, meaning that it modifies a noun. Adnominal, nom is noun. So when you draw a tree for that reading, the PP here has to be part of the NP to go together. Okay? So it would look like a man with a telescope, so it would be NP, and then determiner A, N, man. And then that man has a telescope, right? So PP is here. So, and then here with a telescope. Now I'm using a shorthand way, right, to represent this PP, but you can draw the tree in detail. Okay? That's the first interpretation. The second interpretation is I saw a man. The second is I saw a man and I used a telescope to see him, right? In this case, with the telescope is adverbial, right? It modifies saw. Saw with what? So the place on the tree is different. It's not under the NP anymore because it had nothing to do with the man, but it has to do with the VP, which is me. So it would look like this. So this is the first reading. The second reading would be like this. I'll erase this. The second reading would be, I'll just draw the VP, okay? The VP of that would be the V, saw, and then NP, the man. With the telescope cannot come from here because it has nothing to do with that NP because it's adverbial. So it will come from the VP here. So it will be PP with a telescope, right? Adverbial, meaning that it works with the VP. See, the first one, it come off the NP. The second one, it comes off the VP. That's the difference. So when you look at this tree, you would see, oh, it's saw with telescope rather than the man with the telescope. But if you look at this tree, oh, it's a man with the telescope, right? It's a man who had the telescope like that. So that's what we looked at last time. Okay. So on the exam, you should be able to do conjoined sentences, draw trees for conjoined sentences, embedded sentences, and also draw two trees. Draw two trees for ambiguous sentences, sentences with ambiguity. Right? And then what reading goes with what tree, and so on. Right? Now, today we'll finish syntax and we'll move on to meaning, pragmatics. Okay? So when we do meaning or pragmatics, you don't have to draw trees, for those of you who hate drawing trees. But there are people who like drawing trees. people have different strengths and weaknesses and so on. So we'll finish syntax with this topic, transformation. Okay? So transformation, remember I said that at this point you should be able to analyze the structure of almost all sentences in English, okay? With some exceptions, with a few exceptions. And these exceptions are questions, and then some relative clauses that we haven't studied. So today we'll study questions. Okay? So by the time we finish today's class, you should be able to analyze all sentences in English. Okay? And this is the topic of transformation. Transformation has to do with the idea that grammar has at least two levels. This is the handout from last time, the PowerPoint file from last time. It's the idea that grammar has at least two levels, the deep level and the surface level. Deep here doesn't mean deep, deep, deep. Deep here means the level before it changes, the level before it changes, right? And sometimes the deep level can transform into the surface level, right? And the sentence may look different, but it comes from the same underlying structure. We call it underlying structure or the deep structure. And we will focus on questions, okay? We will focus on questions in this class. So, for example, the question like, is it cold in Seoul? Is it cold in Seoul? That question is posited. That question is thought to have come from is cold in Seoul, right? Basically, both have the same structure, right? Both have the same structure, syntactician would say, but something happened so that the statement is transformed into a question. The reason why we argue that there is transformation is that because there's transformation, we just have to have one rule, right? If we do it without transformation, it means two sentences have two different structures, which we don't want. Because we want to claim that all sentences are based on the same limited number of rules, right? So we just say that the basic rules are the same, but there is what we call transformative steps that happen that changes one to the other, right? Or the chicken crossed the road, we have the road was crossed by the chicken. These two sentences, the passive and the active voice, are also related. And some transformative steps happened in between and changes one to another like that, okay? But today we'll focus on questions only. Now we'll take a look at questions. There are two types of questions in English, right? Yes, no questions and WH questions. WH questions are questions that start off with, of course, WH, or the word how, just H, okay? Yes, no questions are questions that seek for a yes or no answer, right? So the listener is supposed to answer with a yes or a no, confirmation or denying. But WH questions ask for more information, like who, which, when, why, like that. Okay, so you guys know this already. So we'll look first at yes, no question, right? When you have statements like all of these, John is a doctor, you want to change it into a yes, no question. You can do it like, is John a doctor? Like that. June has rented an apartment. Has June rented an apartment? Like that. A man with a hat is here. Is a man with a hat here? Like that. She would probably come tomorrow. Would she probably come tomorrow? And so on. People could, every one of us can do this, right? Change from one to the question, the corresponding question version. Now, what's the rule, right? Syntacticians want to discover the rules that underlie these things, right? So based on the first example, it seems that what you do is to move, if this is the original, right? What you do is to move is to in front of one, right? So that's perhaps our first hypothesis. Move the second word to the first, to place it in front of the first word. So that's our first hypothesis. The second one, June has rented an apartment. Is it still true that we move the second word to the front? Yes, right? Has moves to the front of June, right? So our hypothesis is still true. But in the third one, is it true? A man with a hat is here. Is a man with a hat here? Can we move the second word? The second word in the first one is. The second one in the second one is has. But in the third one, what's the second word? The second word is a man, right? So perhaps our hypothesis is wrong. So it's not that we move the second word, but in this case we move is. Is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth word even, right? So it means that native speakers of English must have internalized this rule, right? The rule of what moves, right? And in these cases, if we look at all these examples, what moves perhaps is the what we call is and has and is and would and does and did, right? In the first four, you move what we call auxiliary verbs. Okay? I will write it out here. We haven't talked about auxiliaries in particular, but so in the first four, we move auxiliary verbs, right? And if you don't want this term, just use helping verbs, right? Auxiliary means helping. Helping means they are not the main verbs, right? So we move auxiliary verbs such as is, or are, or was, or were, or have, or has, and so on, right? These are what we call auxiliary verbs. And we can also move what people call modals. Modals are type of helping verbs. Modals such as would, will, shall, should, and so on. You guys know this already as second language learners, right? So if there is an auxiliary verb like is or am or are or was or were, which we call be verb, the be verb, right? If there is an auxiliary verb like is, am, or are, or if there's a modal like will or shall, move that to the front. Wherever it is, move it to the front, right? So this is the rule that native speakers have internalized. What if there's no is, am, or are, and there's no modal? You have to do like step examples 5 and 6. Jane drives a sports car. Does Jane drive a sports car? Jeff played basketball last night. Did Jeff play basketball last night? So in the sentence, in the original sentence, there's no is or are or am or modal, right? Only the true verb drives and played. So what you do in this case is you use the do, the verb to do support, right? The verb to do, which is also an auxiliary. You use the verb to do and you front it, right? You bring it to the front. And then in the corresponding tense. The first one is present tense, the S in drives. So when you question, make it into a question, you have does. The second one is ed, past tense, so you use did. And notice that when you pull the auxiliary verb to do, the original tense, the original verb ending, drive and play is gone because they are all reflected in the does and did. Okay? So that's what we do. So this is what we talked about, right? If there is a be or an auxiliary verb, move it to the front, leaving everything else the way it is. So in absence of the be and the aux, we use the do support, right? We make it into the question by using the verb to do in the corresponding tense. That's what we do. So this is another piece of evidence that native speaker of English already know what works together as a chunk. In a man with a hat is here. You see, a man with a hat is an NP, right? A man with a hat, that's an NP. So native speakers of English would move is across that chunk, So our analysis of the sentence into different levels, NP, VP, that's meaningful, right? Because this works together as a chunk, and is moved to here, and the word is moves across one long NP, right? So every word in the NP works together like that. So that's how we analyze it also, right? So the tree, since we claim that all sentences look the same, right? And there is some transformative step, right? There are some transformative steps to making a statement into a question. So the original, let's say, is John a doctor, right? The original would be like this: John, right? Everyone could do this. John is, and then NP is here. So we have determiner A, and then doctor. So that's the original. Now we say that some transformative steps, right, happen to change it into a question. So is, remember, if there's an auxiliary, which is here, it will be moved to the front. So we just indicate the movement like this. Okay? Now, where should it land? Now, there's no place that it should land, right? That it could land. But syntacticians argue that, well, here, there is what we call a CP and C. So this is where it lands, is like this. I'll explain, okay? If you want to write that down, I'll give you 15 seconds. I'll explain why there is a CP. Now, I'll explain why there's a CP here. You might ask, well, isn't a CP only used when there's an embedded clause, right? You might ask me, why is there a CP here? It's not an embedded clause. It's just a question. There's only one verb, right? It's not an embedded clause like what we saw in I said that and so on. But this is what we call just theoretical assumption. Theoretical assumption, meaning that this is what syntacticians argue, right? That it exists. Because John is a doctor is a statement, right? And it's just a simple sentence with S goes to NP and VP like that, right? Now, but there is a potential, there's a possibility that we can embed it in another, longer clause. For example, I said that John is a doctor, right? Because of that possibility, we think that, well, John is a doctor could have, theoretically speaking, could have a CP here, waiting for it to be expanded like that, right? So there is a CP above here, CP, C, and S above here. But when we say it as a simple sentence, it's just unfilled by anything, right? Because you can say, I said that, and so on. So when we make it into a question, then this CP and the C could be the landing site for the word is that moves to the front like that, okay? So we can make use of the CP, right? And let's see, what else? And another argument is that you won't see the question and complementizer that happen together because they are mutually exclusive. So we could use the CP and C here as the landing site, okay? Theoretically speaking. Number 2 is the same thing, right? Number 2 is the same thing. So here we have Jane has rented an apartment. So we have here Jane, and then the VP goes to V, and then there is an ox, and then the V, right? We have Jane, and then has rented. So what moves? Has moved to here, and rented stays in the same place. And in other cases, we have other modals or other auxiliary verbs that move, right? So for played basketball last night, the idea is the same thing, right? So we have S goes to NP and VP. NP is Jeff, right? V played, and then NP basketball. And then last night is another NP, right? So what moves? The ED moved to the front. We have C here, and it came out as did, right? Like that, okay? So this is gone. So by using the same tree, but we just indicate the movement, we can claim that they both have the same basic structure, but the transformative step of movement happens, right? So that we have the same, we have a different surface structure, but the deep structure is the same. Did could move back to Jeff played, and so on. Okay. Now, the final thing in syntax is WH questions. Remember, there are two types of questions. One, yes/no question, which we just finished, right? So for the yes/no question, move the aux or modal or use the do support. For WS questions, what do? We have one additional step, okay? Let's look at what changes happen here. This is a home juicer, things that you use to squeeze juice out of fruit, right? So this is a home juicer, and you make a question, what is that, right? Or what is that? That is a home juicer. What is that? So if you compare the two versions, now it seems that that remains in the same spot, that. But then what's different is a home juicer is gone. And then perhaps it changes into the word what. This is what. So the home juicer changes to what. And then what has been moved to the front. And then is used to be after that, right? Now is before that. So it seems that there are two steps here. The first step is the movement of the WH word, which a home juicer turns into, right? The movement of the WH word. And second, the movement of the aux, right? So two steps. In yes/no questions, only one step. But WH questions, two steps. The WH word, the movement of the WH word, and also the movement of the aux, which is what we also find in yes/no questions. Like here, her name is Jane. What is her name? So the word Jane changes into the WH word what, and then it moves to the front, and so is the verb is. Okay. He talked to Steve. Who did he talk to? So here, there's no ox, so you have to do the do support. We have did, right? And now to Steve changes to who, and then the word who moves to the front, right? So the blanks here indicate what moved, right? Talked, the ed changes to did, remember? And the did moves to the front. And then to Steve, Steve is gone from the original position, changes into the word who, and who moves to the front, okay? She called 911, who did she call, and so on. So here, the ed is gone, and the 911 is gone from the original position, changing into the word who, and then moves to the front, and so on. And the same goes for the last one, okay? Now, perhaps an easier way to see this, an easier way to see this is what I call, echo questions. Echo, right? Echo question. Echo question. Echo questions are questions that people use to confirm what they didn't hear so clearly. So this is a home juicer, right? Or that is a home juicer. If you didn't hear this sentence well, you could ask, that's a what? That's a what? So this is what we call an echo question. So a question to confirm what you didn't hear so clearly. So the echo question here tells us that what originally is here, right? This is a what, replacing a home juicer like that. So then when it becomes a proper question, what's that? So it means that the word what has moved to the front, right? So echo questions serve as one piece of evidence that there is the WH word that moves, right? Like the second one also, her name is Jane. Her name is what? Like that. Her name is what? So an echo question. Her name is what? So then the final step, what is her name? So what has to move from the original position, right? The movement in syntax is not what we see, right? It's not what we see, because what we see is the final result. But we can use echo questions as the intermediate step to help us say that the WH word used to be here. Her name is what? And then now it moves to the front so that it becomes what is her name, like that. Okay? So when we have the WH questions, again, we move two things. We move the WH always, right? And then we also move the auxiliary, or if we don't have the auxiliary, we move the do and the did. Okay? So for trees, what do? You have two things, right? So let's say her name is what, right? So we have S goes to NP and VP. So here is determiner, her name, right? And then the VP, the V is, let's say NP here, Jane or what, okay? Or Jane, whatever. And then how did it become what is her name? So two things, right? Two things move. So the word what, the WH word, and the is. So we have two things that move. And then we still have the CP here, CPC. So we have this moves. And then the word what also moves to here. So we have two things here. In this case, remember, is the whole NP that moves. Not just a word, but it's the whole NP. Right? Let's see. At what time will you arrive? How about this one? At what time will you arrive? It's the WH question, right? Because you don't just answer yes or no, right? So now, again, WH questions, two things move. The first thing is ox or do. So here, right? Now this is the ox, right? Or modal, right? Now the second thing is the WH word. Or not just the WH word, but perhaps the whole chunk. So in this case, at what time? The whole thing, right? The whole thing moves. So if you push it back to the original position, making it an equal question, you arrive at what time? Right? At what time? To make it easier for you, you should push it back or make an equal question out of it, right? You arrive at what time? Like that. Now, if you do it like this, you should be able to analyze the structure, right? You should be able to analyze the structure. So at what time should be the preposition phrase that moves. So it should look like this. You arrive at what time? So it would be NP and VP, and then NU, right? So the VP goes to V, and then ox, we have will, and then arrive, and then prepositional phrase, the P, at, P, and then NP, always, right? Then what time? What is a determiner? What? And then N time. Why what is the determiner? It could be 3. Remember, numbers. Numbers are always determiner. 3 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, like, and so on. At which time, at what time, right? So now what moves? We say that it's the whole phrase, which is this thing, right? At what time? It moves to the front, and also the word will also move to the CP, the C position, like that. So in this case, what moves? The PP, right? The whole PP, not just the word what, but at what time, right? With who did you have lunch? This one should be easy also, right? With who did you have lunch? Now, in order to see what moves, push it back, right? Push this chunk back to the original position. So, you did have lunch. You did have lunch, or you had lunch with who, right? You had lunch with who? So same thing, right? So it's the prepositional phrase that moves to the front. All different types of movement in syntax are all theoretical, meaning that they are abstract. Okay, and we said that there's movement because we have evidence like echo questions. You arrive at what time, or you had lunch with who, right? That is the what we call the underlying structure. And then when the surface structure is different, like at what time will you arrive, or with who did you have lunch? When the surface structure is different from this, the underlying structure or the deep structure, we said that there's movement. And that movement is only in our head, not in reality, right? And the tree just shows you that is what is going on in our mind, in our head, like that. So we are done with syntax, okay? And it's up to this point that you have to be responsible for in syntax. If you go on at a higher level, they will talk about different types of movement. This is just only one type of movement, the WH movement. Okay, but there are other types of movement as well. So if you are interested, just take another class in syntax. Some people like syntax because they never want to work on sentences longer than 10 words or so, right? Because syntax, when we analyze sentences, we only analyze like up to 10 words or so, right? Or 15 words or so, right? And the data looked very clean, meaning that there are not a lot of little words that like, oh, like, you know, like, I'll tell you, right? There are words like that in real life, right? But in syntax, you just have clean data, meaning data that you can work with, you can manipulate, and so on, right? If you have questions about syntax, just come and ask me during the break, okay? So today we'll get started on semantics and pragmatics, and we'll focus on meaning. There's no tree. Some of you might be happy that there's no tree in semantics and pragmatics. Okay? But sometimes when we study meaning, it could be confusing. More confusing than syntax, because syntax you work with just short sentences, right? You don't even work with a paragraph. You work with like 15-word sentences at most, right? But when you talk about meaning, when you talk about pragmatics and semantics, both fields deal with meaning. Sometimes it has to do with logic. Sometimes it has to do with meaning that you cannot see, meaning that you must read from the mind of the sayer, of the reporter, like that. So it could be confusing in many cases, right? And when we talk about syntax, we separate, right? When we talk about syntax, we separate language from the context in which it's used, right? When we analyze words like this, sentences like this, at what time will you arrive, or with who did you have lunch? We just take these sentences out of the context, out of the original context. We don't care about the context. We only care about the structure, right? So that's what we do when we analyze structures. But when we look at semantics and pragmatics, we must not forget that language is always used in a particular context, and the context will have a bearing on the meaning, right? On the meaning of the sentence, right? So when Chomsky, you know, he is a famous syntactician, and he came up with this sentence: the colorless green idea sleep furiously, like this, right? And he said that it doesn't matter the meaning. When we do syntax, what we do is to analyze that this is a proper grammatical sentence because we have the NP, we have the VP, and other words follow the phrase structure rules. So it doesn't matter the meaning, right? But when we do pragmatic and semantics, sentences like this cannot happen because no one would ever utter this kind of sentence, right? Or the ambiguous cases that we looked at last time, I gave her dog biscuits, right? Yes, it's possible that it has two meanings, but in real life, only one meaning is possible. And the meaning has to do with the context in which that sentence is uttered, okay? And the use of language is a social practice. Then in understanding language, you need to recognize what the person means or intends to say. So that's what we'll be studying now, right? We focus on the meaning in context, okay? And pragmatics is a subfield in linguistics and the same as semantics. Pragmatics studies the meaning as communicated by a speaker and interpreted by a listener, right? So we focus on the meaning. And it has more to do with what people mean by their utterances, more than what the words in the phrases might mean by themselves. So we look at the context and look and try to understand the meaning of those words or those phrases, not words or sentences in isolation as we do in syntax. Okay? And sometimes there is what we call invisible meaning, right? What is meant but what is not actually said or written. Okay? So if you, for example, if you have a girlfriend, and you said to her, tonight, I'll play a game with my friends. LOL, right? League of Legends. That's what Korean people like to, Korean males especially, like to do. Hyunho, you like LOL, right? With my friends tonight. Just have dinner by yourself, and your girlfriend says, fine, right? So that fine, is it fine or not fine? Typically not fine, right? But it's sarcastic, right? So this is what we mean by invisible meaning. What is even not said that, oh, I'm not fine with that decision, but not said or not written, but is conveyed or is intended. So this is what we'll be studying. So it could be fuzzy, it could be unclear because it's not said, but we have to guess from the context, right? So this might be an area that some people don't like because it's not like syntax where you just have to work with the structure, right? And there are two main issues that we'll be studying in this class: how meaning overlaps and is presupposed. And if you want detailed explanation in the textbook, these are the two topics, entailment and presupposition, between those pages. And then how context shapes meaning, we'll look at dexes, we'll look at speech acts, and also conversation rules. So those are the pages in the book that are relevant to our topic. Today, I hope to do number 1, and next time I hope to do number 2. Okay? So how meaning overlaps and how meaning is presupposed, right? So we're looking at meaning in context now. Now, there are two things that we'll be looking at today, which is number 1, entailment and presupposition, how meaning overlaps and is presupposed, right? Sentences can include the meanings of other sentences. We know that, right? We know that to be true. Sentences can include the meanings of other sentences, so hence overlapping, right? The meaning relationship is called entailment, okay? You know the verb entail, right? To entail. To entail means to include, like that. To cover, to include, to cover, like that. If sentence, so entailment means that sentence X entails sentence Y, or you can change it to A and B. Sentence A entails sentence B if the truth of B follows necessarily from the truth of A, like that. So that may be difficult to see, right? So I'll show you one thing, okay? Now, if you look at this one, Mary met a bachelor. Mary, who is a lady, right, a female, the name of a female, and she met a bachelor, right? This sentence, right, entails Mary met an unmarried man. Okay? Why is that? Because the word bachelor here overlaps with unmarried man. Okay? If Mary met a bachelor is true, then it must also be true, necessarily. It must also be true that Mary met an unmarried man. Okay? It cannot be true that Mary met an unmarried man is false, while Mary met a bachelor is true. It cannot be that. If it's true that Mary met a bachelor, right, it must also be true, necessarily be true, that Mary met an unmarried man. Because bachelor here overlaps with the word unmarried. Okay? Unmarried man too, not unmarried woman. Okay? In the second one, Lincoln was killed. That sentence, Lincoln was killed, entails Lincoln died, right? Because when Lincoln was killed, it's true, if that's true, that he was killed, 100% of the time he must have died, right? If someone got killed, he cannot be alive, right? So if he was killed, then he must have died, right? So kill is to make someone die, like that. So the two sentences overlap in terms of meaning. Okay? Mary sold her house to Sue entails Sue bought Mary's house. Okay? Because sold to, meaning to sell something to someone, it means that someone buys that thing from you. Right? So the two sentences overlap. Okay? Now the relationship of entailment is usually, not always, but usually one way, unidirectional, right? Because if you look at the second one, Lincoln was killed entails Lincoln died, right? If someone got killed, someone died, for sure, right? But Lincoln died, the sentence Lincoln died, does it entail Lincoln was killed? No, right? He died. Maybe he died because of cancer. Maybe he died because he fell from the stairs. He died because of a heart attack. He died because of because of the earthquake, whatever, right? So Lincoln died does not entail, doesn't cover, doesn't include the fact that he was killed. But the other way around is true. Lincoln was killed. It must mean that he died, right? But he died doesn't have to mean that he was killed. He could have died from some other causes. Right? So again, the relationship between entailment, two sentences, the relationship of two sentences and entailment doesn't mean that it's two-way. Okay? It is usually one way or unidirectional. Okay? What we'll do, let's see, do we have something else? What we'll do now is we will take a break, right? And we will come back and do some practice exercises on entailment because it could be very confusing. It has to do with logic. You have to think, is there an exception, right? Mary met a bachelor. Does it entail Mary met an unmarried man? Is there any exception? If there is an exception, then entailment is not there, okay? So entailment is a necessary logic relationship between two sentences. Okay? So we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and do practice exercises on entailment, okay? And if you have questions, you can come and see me during the break, whatever questions you have, okay? Another sentence, when let's see, sentence A entails sentence B when B, the truth of B, follows from the truth of A, right? Follows necessarily, right? Inescapably true, right? So in entailment, the way that we symbolize it is by using an arrow. So A entails B. A means sentence A, okay? Sentence A entails sentence B when B follows necessarily or necessarily follow A. But the relationship is not always bidirectional, right? It is usually unidirectional. So, for example, on the first page, okay, on the first page you see 10 questions, right? 10 questions. You should check, I asked you to check whether A entails B or not. So if A is true, B has to be true without any exception. Okay? If there's an exception that B is not true, then it's not entailment. Okay? So now we are looking at examples of entailment. Okay? Again, entailment means that if one sentence entails another sentence, the truth of that entailed sentence must follow logically from the truth of the first one, okay? Without any exception. In the first one, let's look at this together. In the first one, John is the parent of James. Okay? John is the parent of James. So that is a statement. Is it always true that James must be the child of John? If John is the parent of James, then is it always true that James is the child of John? Yes or no? If John is the parent of James, okay? John is the father of James. So James must be the child of John or not? Yes, right? Always the case, right? Always the case. So A entails B in this case. A entails B. Now let's look at number 9. Let's skip other examples because I want you guys to do the rest. So let's look at 9. John cooked an egg. John cooked an egg. If that's true, does it mean that John boiled an egg or not? No, right? A doesn't entail B. Why is that? John cooked an egg. He could have cooked it using other methods, right? He could fry. So that's one type of cooking. Fry the egg, right? Not necessarily boil the egg, but fry the egg, right? So A doesn't entail B, right? A doesn't entail B in this case. But does B entail A? Does B entail A? This is not on the handout, right? We just want to practice this. B, John boiled the egg. Does it always mean that John cooked the egg? So B entails A or not? Is boiling one type of cooking? Yes, right? Yes. So boiling is one type of cooking. So if he boiled the egg, then it must be true, always the case that he cooked the egg. So B entails A, but A doesn't entail B in this case, okay? So the two sentences are not equal in terms of entailment. Only B entails A, but A doesn't entail B, okay? So I'll give you perhaps 7 minutes to do number 2 to number 10, the rest. So ask yourself whether the sentence A that you see entails sentence B or not. Okay? So B must always be true, right? If A entails B, B must always be true as a result of A. Okay? There must be no exception. Okay? So I'll give you perhaps 5 to 7 minutes. Now walk around if you need help. There's this observation that when A entails B, A is more specific than B, right? The meaning of A is more specific than B. So we said, for example, that if John boiled an egg, right? If John boiled an egg, it entails John cooked an egg, right? We say that. That's because the meaning of boil here, boil means cook, right? Plus using, let's say, boiling water like that. Cook using water. So the meaning of boil is more specific, right, than just cook, because it's cook plus using boiling, the boiling method like that. So the most of the entailment relationship is based on this type of relationship, more specific, okay? But there are some cases that it doesn't need to be specific, like perhaps in the case of what we'll see in one of these examples, when A is exactly the same as B, not more specific or less specific, but exactly the same. That could be a relationship of entailment also. Okay. So let's look at number 2. Let's look at number 2. My father owns this car. This car belongs to my father. It entails it, right? If my father owns this car, it must follow, right? It must follow that this car belongs to my father. There could be no situation where my father owns the car, but the car doesn't belong to my father. There cannot be that situation. So A entails B. This is an example where the meaning of A is exactly the same as B, not more specific than B. So entailment could happen in this type of case where A is more specific, but here it's the same. So you use a synonym like that. So own is to belong to, right? Number 3, the fly was on the wall. The wall was under the fly or not? Right? No, right? Because the fly is on the wall like this. The wall is not necessarily under, right? So under has to be like on and then under like that. So A doesn't entail B. A doesn't entail B. Number 4, some countries have no coastline, right? Some countries have no coastline, right? Only some of them have no coastline. Others may or may not, right? Not all countries have a coastline. So not all, right? Not all countries have a coastline. So some must have, right? Not all have a coastline. So some do and some don't. So A entails B in this case. 4, yes, A entails B. Right. Number 5, Fred sent Mary a new book. Is it the same, more or less the same, or does it entail Fred sent a new book to Mary or not? Yes, right? 2 sentences have the exact same meaning, So entailment. Entailment could happen in cases where the 2 sentences have the exact same meaning, like number 5 or number 2. And in most cases, like this, A is more specific than B. Okay? This is in number 6. You can see number 6. I saw a boy. Does it mean I saw a person? Yes, right? Because boy, the meaning of boy is a person plus young, right? It's more specific. So when you see a boy, you must see a person also, right? You cannot, when you see a boy, it's not possible that you see an animal, right? So, number 7, John stole a car. So he stole a car. So he took a car or not? Yes, right? When he stole something, he must have taken it, right? Because stole means to take it without permission, right? Without anyone seeing it and so on. But still, the taking, the part of the taking of the car is in stole, right? So the word stole is more specific than just take, because stole here to have taken without permission, like that. Okay. Number 8. His speech disturbed me, right? His speech disturbed me. Does it entail his speech deeply disturbed me or not? No, right? Because disturb is less specific than deeply disturbed. Because deeply disturbed is disturbed plus deeply, right? So if his speech disturbed me, it may have disturbed me just not too much, right? Just to a fair amount, but not deeply. So A doesn't entail B, but B does entail A, right? But A doesn't entail B in this case. We looked at number 9 already. So John cooked an egg doesn't have to mean doesn't have to entail John boiled an egg, right? He could have fried it, he could have grilled it in so many ways, okay? Number 10, some boys ran down the street, some kids ran down the street, right? Yes, right, because boy includes young, right? Young people. So kids, young, right? But the relationship is not unique, is not bidirectional, right? Some kids ran down the street doesn't entail some boys, because some kids ran down the street could be some girls also, right? So in number 10, A doesn't entail, A entails B, but B doesn't entail A. Okay. So that's the relationship of entailment. Okay. And we'll look at this one as the last thing for this last topic for today, which is presupposition. Presupposition is different from entailment. Okay. Presupposition refers to what a speaker or writer assumes to be true before making a sentence without having to say it in that sentence. Okay? So this is where it's different, right? For entailment, is what is the sentence states, right? What you see, what you hear in the sentence. But for presupposition, you see the word pre, right? Pre is before. Suppose is to think, right? So presupposition is what the writer or what the speaker assumes to be true, even before or even having to say it in the sentence, okay? But for entailment, again, for entailment is what you see or what you hear. It's already stated explicitly. But for presupposition, it's not explicitly stated, right? It's what the speaker or the writer assumes to be the case, and what the speaker doesn't have to say. Okay? A presupposition is assumed rather than directly asserted, right? Asserted meaning claimed, right? But in entailment, it has to be asserted. But in a presupposition, it doesn't have to be said. It doesn't have to be claimed. It doesn't have to be asserted, right? So, for example, when you say Anne has a sofa, right? This is not a presupposition. But Anne has a sofa. It means Anne has a sofa, right? So this explicitly says that Anne owns a sofa. It explicitly asserts that, okay? But if you compare it to the second one, don't sit on Anne's sofa. Don't sit on Anne's sofa. Anne's sofa here, the writer or the speaker, when he writes that or when he utters that sentence, he doesn't have to say Anne has a sofa, right? He doesn't have to say that. But as soon as he says, don't sit on Anne's sofa, the listener should already know, right? That should already presuppose that Anne has a sofa, right? Because Anne's sofa here, you cannot sit on it, means that it's her sofa, like that. So Anne's sofa here is what is presupposed, what is assumed to be true, without having to say Anne has a sofa, like that, okay? Or if I say the King of Korea is bald, the King of Korea is bald, it means that I must have presupposed that there is a King of Korea, like that, right? So it presupposes that there is a King of Korea, like that. If I say that the King of Korea is bald, it means that I think already that there is a king of the person who is the King of Korea, like that. So it presupposes that there's Korea has a king, like that. Whether or not that's true is not important here, right? Because we are concerned here with the presupposition of the speaker or the writer. We are concerned with what the writer or the speaker assumes to be the case. So if the writer says the King of Korea is bald, then he thinks that there is a king, right, in Korea, like that. Whether or not that's true is a different issue. His presupposition can be true or false, but that's what he presupposes. That's what we focuses on, right? That's what our focus is on. And there could be more than one presupposition in an utterance. For example, where has Chris looked for the keys? Where has Chris looked for the keys? That sentence presupposes many things. Chris has looked for the keys, or even there are keys that Chris has looked for, right? Where has Chris looked for the keys? The keys means there must have been those keys, right? And those keys are not with him at the moment, and so on, right? So let's see, this is not in here, okay? Not on the PowerPoint. There are two major kinds of presupposition. The first one is existential presupposition. Okay? And the other one is perhaps logical presupposition. Two kinds of presupposition. Right? Existential not preposition, but presupposition assumes that something exists. Something exists. Existential, right? Exists, meaning that there exists such a thing, right? So when you see nouns, proper nouns like names, when you see names, for example, Hyun-ho is late. You see this name, right? Hyun-ho. When somebody says Hyun-ho is late, that person presupposes that there must be a person by the name of Hyun-ho, like that. So we say that this is what we call existential presupposition. So there exists a person by the name of Hyun-ho, like that. By the name of Hyun-ho, like that. Whenever you see proper nouns, you know proper nouns, right? Nouns that indicate names, like Hanyang is a great school, like that. So Hanyang exists. A place called Hanyang exists, like that. Okay? Or is cold in Seoul. So there's a city by the name of Seoul, for example, without having to say that, oh, there's a city by the name of Seoul in that sentence, because it's a presupposed thing, right? In the same way, where has Chris looked for the keys? There is a person by the name of Chris. Whenever someone says that sentence, there must be a person by the name of Chris that he knows, he or she knows, right? Or he or she's know of, right? Or names, right? Names, and also noun phrases with determiners, the keys, like that. Look for the keys. So there must exist, right? Some keys that he has been looking for. And like this one, did you buy this awful wine, right? So there may be many presuppositions in there. Someone bought the wine, right? You or not you is a different matter. So there exists someone, right, who bought the wine. Whether it's you or someone else doesn't matter, right? But there must exist that person. And then the wine must exist. And then the wine must be awful, right? Because you see the determiner, this awful wine. So the wine must exist, and also the wine must be awful, like that. That's the presupposition of the speaker. He must have thought that the wine is awful. Whether or not it's awful in real life, we don't care. Whether or not other people think that it's awful or not is a different issue. But the speaker presupposes that it's awful. Remember, the presupposition belongs to the speaker, okay, or the writer of that sentence. This is different from entailment, right? Entailment doesn't have to do with the speaker. Entailment is the semantic, or is the aspect, the meaning aspect of the sentence, logical meaning. But here, it belongs to the speaker, okay? And finally, How do you test a presupposition? Presupposition is different from entailment because presupposition is interesting in that if you negate by putting the word not, negation, by putting the word not, right? The presupposition is still there. Doesn't matter if you cancel, if you negate the original sentence, the presupposition is still true. For example, let's see. Let's look at an easier one. The King of Korea is bald. Okay, let's look at that easy one. The King of Korea is bald. The King of Korea is bald. Okay, now remember, if there's a noun or a noun with a determiner, existential presupposition kicks in. So we agree that when somebody says the King of Korea is bald, the presupposition is Korea has a king, right? Again, it doesn't matter whether that's true in reality or not, because a presupposition lies in the speaker's opinion, right? Now, Korea has a king. That's the presup, right? That's the presup. Now, I said that to test a presup, you negate the original sentence. If you say the King of Korea is not bald, the King of Korea has a head full of hair, like that. If it's a true presupposition, it will stay the same. It will not be canceled. So the King of Korea is not bald. He has lots of hair. So it still presupposes that Korea has a king, right? If I say the King of Korea is not bald, he has a head full of hair. So it still means that Korea has a king, right? So the cancellation here doesn't affect the presupposition at all. The presupposition survives the cancellation, okay? That's the interesting issue of presupposition. Because for entailment, if you cancel it, like John cooked an egg, John didn't cook an egg, the entailment will be destroyed. The entailed sentence cannot survive, okay? But for presupposition, the presupposition always survives, okay? Survives the cancellation. So same thing here. I understand why Mike smashed the TV. I understand why Mike smashed the TV. Here, one of the presupposed things is Mike smashed the TV already, so I understand it. I understand why he smashed the TV, right? Perhaps he was angry, perhaps he was sad, perhaps whatever, right? Perhaps he hated that TV so much, whatever. But I understand it, why he did it. So if that person says, I understand why he did it, so he must have done it already. So the presupposition is Mike smashed the TV, right? That's the presupposition. Now to test whether that presupposition is a presupposition or not, negate the sentence here. I did not understand, I do not understand why he smashed the TV. When you say, I don't understand or I did not understand why he smashed the TV, still the presupposition is he smashed it already, right? But it's just that you didn't understand why, right? But still, he smashed it already. So the presupposition survived, right? So Mike smashed the TV is a presupposition of that sentence. Okay. Now, in this sentence also, have you stopped, if somebody asks you, have you stopped beating your girlfriend? Have you stopped beating your girlfriend? There could be a few presuppositions here, right? The listener has a girlfriend according to the opinion of the sayer, right? The listener has a girlfriend, like the existential, remember? And also the listener beat his girlfriend at least once in the past, right? Stop, because the word stop, meaning the stop presupposes that something must have happened before, right? And then it stopped. So there could be two presuppositions there. Right? No matter whether you answer yes or no, yes, I have stopped beating. No, I haven't stopped beating. yet. No matter what you answer, the presupposition still holds, right? So the presupposition still exposes you as a mean person, like that. Okay? And presupposition can be quite damaging. Why did you take drugs again? The word again presupposes that it must have happened before, like that, right? So that sentence presupposes that you are a drug addict, like that. Okay. So we'll come back next week and we'll try to do presupposition. So you can work on these sentences on the back of the handout at home and write out some presuppositions that you can see. So there may be more than one presupposition per sentence. Okay, you don't have to turn that in, but do it as homework, and we'll come back and look at these next time. Okay, and there are some sentences on the first page also for you to draw trees, and you don't have to turn that in, but I will send out the answer key by email. Okay, for WH movements. Okay, for WH questions. Okay. So I'll see you guys back here, and we'll let's say pick up where we left off today. How context shape meaning next time.